Hey YouTube, what's going on? Snowflarky's Emos here today with a new deck profile for you. No, I've been on a Master Duel kick doing Master Duel decks, but finally got some new TCG builds put together, and we're starting off with my Metaphys deck. Metaphys is a deck I picked up just to play for fun in a casual group, and it's pretty cool. It's a strategy that revolves around banishing a lot of monsters and then getting effects when those monsters are banished. And what I love about Metaphys so much is their retrains of so many iconic Duel Monsters era things like Ragnarok and Nephthys, Daedalus, Tyrant Dragon, stuff like that. So makes it a pretty fun deck. Banishing is pretty sweet. You know, you get to play all those banish anti-meta cards, which are nasty for a lot of decks and opponents to deal with. And, you know, just use these cool monsters, get a lot of effects. When you get a lot of things banished, there are lots of effects activating, and makes it a kind of challenging deck to play. So with that said, let's get into the cards. Starting off with our monsters, I'm playing 3 copies of Metaphys Ragnarok. Metaphys Ragnarok is one of the main normal summon starters of the deck. It's a 4-star worm tuner, which is pretty sweet. And of course, if this card is normal or special summon, you can banish the top 3 cards of your deck. And if you do, this card gains 300 attack for every Metaphys card banished by this effect. So that's pretty sweet. That turns this 1500 attack monster into a bigger monster, either 18, 21, or 2400 attack. And of course, banishing cards is what we want to do. We want to banish those Metaphys cards because then we're going to be getting their effect, which is pretty sweet. And then this card has a second effect that says when this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can special summon a level 5 or higher Metaphys monster from your deck, but banish it during the end phase of the next turn. You can only use these effects of Metaphys Ragnarok once per turn. So pretty cool. That means when we do battle damage, we're going to pull a Metaphys monster out of the deck. There's lots of big Metaphys monsters that we can pull out, and the fact that they get banished during the end phase of the next opponent's next turn isn't even that punishing because, like I said, all the big Metaphys monsters get effects when they are banished that we are definitely going to want to utilize. So Ragnarok is just a great card. Definitely one of the cards you will want to see in your opening hand for sure. Next, getting into some of the big Metaphys cards, we got 3 copies of Metaphys Nephthys. It's a 2400 attack worm monster, and of course, if this card is special summoned by the effect of a Metaphys monster, you can banish all set spell and trap cards on the field, which is pretty cool. Gets rid of those pesky back row. Banish, is nice because, it gets around like Lord of the Heavenly Prison, who protects them from destruction, things like that. So a good card effect to utilize against back row decks. And then one, of course, this card's greatest abilities, all the big Metaphys kind of have this, that if this card was banished during the standby phase of the next turn, you can shuffle the banished card into the deck and get an effect. Well, Metaphys Nephthys effect is that you can shuffle it back into the deck and you can add a Metaphys card from your deck to your hand. So that's a good way to get our hands on Metaphys Ragnarok or one of the other couple Metaphys cards that we really want, like Metaphys Factor, the field spell. So Metaphys Nephthys is nice against back row decks, but even against not against back row decks, it's still pretty nice because that effect to just add a Metaphys card from the deck to their hand is incredible, and we want to make use of it. Next, I'm playing 3 copies of Metaphys Daedalus. Metaphys Daedalus is one of my favorite Metaphys monsters. Definitely one of the reasons I picked up the deck because I'm a huge fan of Daedalus, the monster in Yu-Gi-Oh! And, this is a retrain of it, like several retrains. Metaphys Daedalus is pretty cool. If this card is special summoned by the effect of a Metaphys monster, you can banish all other face-up special summon monsters on the field. So that effect is awesome and definitely one you're going to want to utilize the most because, lots of monsters are special summoned, and even your monsters that get banished are going to be the Metaphys monsters, so they're going to get their effects, and you remove your opponent's special summon monsters. Now that's non-targeting, non-destruction, banish removal. Pretty much as good as it can get for a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and that just makes this card awesome. And then, of course, if this card is banished during the standby phase of the next turn, you could shuffle this card into the deck, and you can banish 1 Metaphys card from your deck. So that's pretty nice. Cycles out a Metaphys, puts Daedalus back, can get you a Metaphys in your graveyard that you want to use on your next turn, like, say, Nephthys. I think a big target for this is the trap card, Metaphys Ascension, because when it gets banished, you get to search a card, kind of just like Nephthys. So you can use that to get your Ragnarok going right away. So two awesome effects. The only thing I will say about Metaphys Daedalus is usually because that effect is so powerful, keep in mind that you might want to keep one in your banish zone to be easily accessible. Because that way it can banish all special summon monsters. And, just something to keep in mind is you might want to make sure you always have at least one Metaphys Daedalus. Don't constantly shuffle them back. And then, of course, last that I'm playing for the big Metaphys monsters is two copies of Metaphys Tyrant Dragon. Metaphys Tyrant Dragon, of course, is pretty cool. If this card was special summoned by the effect of a Metaphys monster, it is unaffected by trap effects, very remnant of Tyrant Dragon. And, of course, also, if it attacks monsters, it can make a second attack in a row. So, you summon Tyrant Dragon, you attack a monster, you can swing again, pretty good. Especially since it's got 2900 attack, you can definitely do damage to monsters. And of course, if this card is banished during the standby phase of the next turn, you shuffle it back into the deck, and you are able to special summon a Metaphys monster from your hand, but banish it during the end phase of the next turn. So that's pretty cool. You can use that to get something like Metaphys Daedalus from your hand onto the field, and banish a bunch of special summon monsters. You can use it to play a Ragnarok, and Ragnarok can banish more cards, which will get you more effects on the following turn. So lots of pretty good uses. Probably the least useful of the big Metaphys monster effects, but still can come in handy. Definitely good to get lots of damage in with that card, though. Next up, I'm playing two copies of Metaphys Decoy Dragon. Metaphys Decoy Dragon is pretty cool. It's a pendulum card, which is interesting. Not that you're really pendulum summoning, but it does mean you can play it on the spell and trap card zone with your effect. So while it's a pendulum scale, when your monster is targeted for an attack, you can target one of your Metaphys monsters that is banished or is in your graveyard, banish this card, and if you do, special summon that monster in attack position. You can only use this effect once per turn. Now, one thing to note is while this is a monster, if you have it in your pendulum scale and are using it as a pendulum, using its pendulum effect to special summon a monster, it's not going to trigger the big Metaphys because they need to be special summoned by a Metaphys monster. So keep that in mind, but it still just does get a big body on board, and of course can be used to spit out Ragnarok if your Ragnarok is banished, and banish more cards, etc. But also, one of those things, an effect monster, when your monster is targeted for an attack, you can target one of your Metaphys monsters that is banished or in your graveyard, banish this card, and if you do, special summon it in attack position. Now that means when it's a monster, you're going to be doing the same thing, except now it'll trigger your big Metaphys cards. Awesome. And then, of course, this monster has one last effect that if this card was banished during the standby phase of the next turn, you can special summon this card onto the field. So it's pretty cool. That just means it's going to go back on the field and can use its monster effect again to special summoning something from your graveyard or is banished, and you can constantly just keep looping it, and that's what makes this card awesome. Yep, definitely pretty cool. Only playing it two because once we got one of it, which it is searchable, we don't really need any more of it, but we definitely do want to see it. It's pretty handy. Now going off of the Metaphys monsters, I am playing three copies of Aloof Lupine. This is one of our other main normal summon starter option. It's a pretty cool monster that says when this card is normal summoned, you can banish a monster from your hand and then banish a monster from your deck with the same type as that monster. All our Metaphys monsters are worm monsters, so that works out pretty well. Gets one of these big Metaphys monsters or even Decoy Dragon out of the hand into the banish zone where they'll get their effects, and then we get to banish another Metaphys monster of our choice, whichever one we want its effect to go off or have access to pull out of the banish zone, and that just makes it pretty sick. Also works pretty well with the next card that we are playing, which is three copies of Necroface. Necroface really does a lot of good work in this deck. If this card is normal summon, you can shuffle all banished cards into the deck, and this card gains 100 attack each. For that is a way to replenish your deck, kind of start things over, and maybe make a big beater. A lot of Desires Gren Maju decks can make use of that effect to keep things going. However, we're not doing that one as much in this deck. Instead, we're going off of the next effect that says if this card is banished, each player banishes 5 cards from the top of their deck. And that's that's pretty much that. You know, we want our cards banished, so we're very happy to banish 5 cards, especially if it's going to be triggering our Metaphys monster effect, trigger our Metaphys ascensions to search us cards. And the nice thing is if you can Necroface into Necroface, then you're going to banish another top 5 cards. And best part yet, our opponent is banishing cards from the top of their deck, and they can banish key combo pieces that they need to play and kind of end their game plan right there. And that just makes it awesome. So definitely a card I want to see at 3, because, you know, if I can banish all 3 of Necrofaces and get all their effects going off, that is incredibly powerful. And then last for the monsters, I'm playing 1 copy of Dimension Shifter. Definitely going to look into bumping this up. I just haven't dug out my other copies. Probably at 2, you know, it's pretty good. Like I said, I do play this deck casually, so Dimension Shifter isn't just necessarily the game winner that it can be in the metagame. But it's still pretty handy, and we definitely want its effect going off. If you have no cards in your graveyard, quick effect, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard this turn until the end of the next turn. All cards that are sent to the graveyard are banished instead. So that's pretty cool. You know, Metaphys monsters, we love being banished, and most Yu-Gi-Oh decks don't like their stuff being banished. So that just is very handy, especially if they're going to pull stuff out from the graveyard. You know, they are not going to have a good time as soon as all their things are going to the banish zone. And that is it for the monsters. Next, we're getting into our spell cards. I am playing 3 copy of As Metaphys. As Metaphys is a pretty sweet card that I like to have. Continuous spell that says once per turn you can banish a Metaphys monster from your hand, and if you do, draw 1 card. So that's pretty nice. Gets rid of our bricky big Metaphys, puts them in the banish zone so we can get their effect, draws us a new card that maybe we can play or just get through our deck, which is pretty nice. And of course, once per turn, if your Metaphys card in its owner's possession is banished, you can apply the effect depending on whose turn it is. If it's your turn, all monsters on the field lose 500 attack and defense, except Metaphys monsters. So that's pretty nice. You know, makes monsters a lot weaker so that you can run them over, especially if you get your Tyrant Dragon, which can attack twice with 2900. Pretty nice. And then, of course, if it's your opponent's turn, you can change the battle positions of all monsters on the field except Metaphys monsters. So that's pretty nice. You know, they summon some monsters, you can banish some stuff, force it to defense. Maybe they can't create as much of an offensive presence. Pretty good effects that are neat. Unfortunately, the thing about As Metaphys is the first time that event happens, the effect is kind of mandatory to trigger. So, you know, if you burn it early, then you know, you can't you can't reliably time it to work at a good moment per se. That is kind of a tough thing to deal with. But still, just the fact that it does cycle your Metaphys cards alone is good enough, and those other effects are definitely bonuses that will come in handy. Next up, I'm playing 2 copies of Metaphys Factor. This card is awesome. This card is game-winning, game-determinative. Metaphys Factor is a field spell that the deck has. It says each turn a level 5 or higher Metaphys monster you normal summon can be summoned without tributing, but banish it during the end phase of the turn. So it's nice. It gets bricky Metaphys monsters out of your hand onto the field for a little more offensive presence. And then when they get banished, it's not even that bad because they're going to get their effects and we're going to have a good time with that. But the real powerhouse text on this effect is your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to your Metaphys monster's effect activation. Now that is so good. It means all your Metaphys monster's effects are going to go off because nothing can be responded to, and a lot of even trap cards and stuff that might deal with them after they're summoned aren't going to be able to be played because their effect is going to activate right away, and then you can't activate cards in response. This came in quite handy in a match I had very recently against the new Trap Tricks structure deck and the new Trap Tricks cards. You know, all those Trap Tricks trap cards are ready to go off, but when Metaphys Factor is on the field, every Metaphys is summoned, activates an effect, and the cards can't be activated in response to the effect. And that makes it pretty sweet. So Metaphys Factor is an incredibly powerful field spell. We're happy to see. Definitely, if we can stick this and our opponent doesn't remove it, we can safely kind of go off. Next, 3-dimensional Fissure. Nice boost in the TCG when we move this up to 3. This card is a continuous spell that just says any monster sent to the graveyard is removed from play instead. That's nice because we want our Metaphys monsters banished, and most decks don't want their cards banished, so it hurts our opponent, helps us. Very good. Yeah, it's definitely just like an auto include for how good it is. Next, I'm playing the one copy of Gold Sarcophagus. Gold Sarc is pretty nice because we can banish a card from our deck face up, and during your second standby phase, after this card's activation, you can add that card to your hand. So that's pretty nice. We could use it to get rid of a key Metaphys monster that we want banished and its effect activated, but usually we're just Gold Sarking for Necroface so that we can immediately trigger its Banish 5. And that really gets things going because 5 cards banished, you'll hit a lot of good targets off of that. And yeah, it's very nice. If this card ever got moved up, and you'd be seeing more of it. And last, I am playing 3 copies of Left Arm Offering, just because I like to use this card to get Gold Sarc. Gold Sarc is powerful enough that it's worth using Left Arm Offering. Left Arm Offering says if you have 2 or more other cards in your hand, banish your hand to add a spell from your deck to your hand. You cannot set spell or trap cards during the turn you activate this effect. So, you got to banish cards in your hand, but if you're banishing Metaphys cards, that's fine. They have effects. You want them to do that. Anyway, and of course, if the card you get is Gold Sarc, and you can play Gold Sarc and banish Necroface to banish a lot of cards, you're going to have a lot of effects going off that is going to build up your board, really get your deck moving. So Left Arm Offering, definitely do like that. And that is it for the spell cards. Lastly here, we're getting into our trap cards. I am playing 3 copies of Metaphys Ascension. Metaphys Ascension, of course, is a normal trap card that says discard a Metaphys card to draw 1 card. Then you can banish a Metaphys monster from your deck, so that's pretty nice. Cycles a card, banishes a Metaphys, which means we're going to get its effect, banishes another Metaphys from the deck, which means we can get the Metaphys effect of our choice. So that's pretty nice. But mainly this card is useful for its second effect, which says if this card is banished, you can add 1 Metaphys monster. You can add 1 Metaphys card, not monster, which is really nice. Gets Metaphys Factor and adds Metaphys 2 from the deck to your hand. So that's pretty nice. Like I said, this is mainly one of the things that we're going to want to send off of a Metaphys Daedalus effect because he just banishes a Metaphys card. If we banish Metaphys Ascension, it's going to immediately trigger and search us a card like Ragnarok or Metaphys Factor, whatever we're looking for to go off. And because of that, we definitely want to play 3 of it. Now, do note that Metaphys Ascension can only use 1 of its effects per turn and only once that turn. So just keep that in mind, but that's fine. We can definitely use it over multiple turns. Next, I'm playing 2 copies of Metaphys Dimension, a continuous trap card that says if your opponent special summons a monster except during the damage step, you can target 1 of your Metaphys monsters and special summon it, but banish it during the end phase of the next turn. That's pretty sweet. Special summon a monster. We talked about already how Metaphys Daedalus could banish special summon monsters, so you can bring out another monster to meet it. Metaphys Daedalus, of course, being a great target because it'll banish all the special summon monsters on the field. And then, of course, Metaphys card in its owner's possession is banished while this card is face up. You can target 1 card your opponent controls and banish it. So that's pretty cool. Really gets things going. Summons a card. When your Metaphys monster gets banished, you can banish a card on the field. Banishing is great. And that, makes it pretty good enough to run it too. It's a trap card, so it's a little slow, but it's still a nice tool to just add to a board, especially once it's getting going. Being able to have the removal, especially because it's our main form of back row removal, is pretty huge. Next, I'm playing 1 copy of Macrocosmos. Again, another card I've considered bumping up to 2 or 3. Macrocosmos, though, is pretty solid. It's just a continuous trap card that just says it banishes all cards that would be sent to the graveyard. Instead of them getting sent to the graveyard, it's going to banish them instead. So that's pretty nice. I mean, Dimensional Fissure kind of already covers most of the bases of what we want to banish and can be played on our first turn right away, unlike Macrocosmos that we have to set and then flip, which makes Dimension Fissure a little better, but Macrocosmos does have the ability to synergize well with Metaphys Ascension. Except, of course, the main problem is that if I activate Metaphys Ascension and use its effect, I don't also get its effect when it gets banished instead of going to the graveyard. But, you know, just something to keep in mind. Considered bumping it up, but instead I'm playing 2 copies of this last card, Dimensional Barrier. We all know Dimensional Barrier. It's a very good trap card, and it was particularly handy in some matchups I was playing with this deck. And so Dimensional Barrier is just very nice to have. You declare 1 monster card type, Ritual Fusion, Synchro, XZ, or Pendulum. And for the rest of this turn, neither player can special summon monsters of that declared type and also negate the effects of all monsters of that type while they are on the field. So, you know, pretty cool. If you're up against a deck that's really going in on one of those types, Dimensional Barrier can just shut them down for a whole turn. And if you shut them down for a whole turn in a deck like Metaphys, where we can get lots of monsters with high attacks out really quickly, we can OTK our opponent on the crackback. So, pretty nice card to have, and definitely liked including it over some extra copies. But things like trap cards, you know, you always be fiddling with your ratios and which trap cards you're playing to deal with the decks you're seeing in your local scene. And that is it for the main deck. So, talking about extra deck cards, I haven't necessarily fleshed out the extra deck fully because I do find that I don't go into the extra deck often, but a couple cards I do want to highlight that you could play in this deck. 3, Geomathmech Final Sigma. Definitely a card that's pretty cool to make because Metaphys Ragnarok here is a tuner, a level 4 tuner, and we do have some level 8 big Metaphys monsters such as Metaphys Nephthys and Metaphys Tyrant Dragon are both 8, so the 8 and the 4 can make 12, and that can make Final Sigma. Final Sigma is pretty cool because if we put it in our extra monster zone, it's unaffected by card effects except Mathmech cards. So with 3,000 attack monster that's unaffected by card effects is pretty annoying to deal with. And of course, if it does battle damage to an opponent by battling an opponent's monster, that battle damage is doubled, which is pretty sweet. So definitely a lot to consider. You know, the big Metaphys monsters are either level 7 or 8. So that means with Metaphys Ragnarok, you can look into any 11 or 12 synchros that you like that can make them work. Another card that I find quite handy is Hope Harbinger. The Titanic Dragon, of course. That's because 2 level 8s, such as Nephthys or Tyrant Dragon, 2 Nephthys, can make Hope Harbinger, and Hope Harbinger is just a spell negate, which is pretty awesome, on a 3,000 attack body, which is pretty cool. And then, of course, even as an second effect, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can detach 1 XZ material from it, and of course change that attack target to this card. And of course that'll put your XZs back in the graveyard, that'll put your Metaphys monsters back in the graveyard where Decoy Dragon can be pulling them out, things like that. So those are mainly the ones I've gone into so far in my experience. I haven't really pulled much else. You can run the Metaphys Horus card, which is a level 6 synchro, which can be made with Ragnarok and Decoy Dragon, which is pretty sweet. Not that Metaphys Horus has any great effects, but it does specifically get your Ragnarok and Decoy Dragon off the field and into the banished zone if you have Dimension Fissure or Macro up. And that means that you're going to be able to pull those cards back out. You know, Decoy Dragon's going to get its effect. You could summon Ragnarok with it. When you summon Ragnarok, you want to keep resummoning Ragnarok because we get its banish effect more. And that's pretty sweet. So definitely a good card in there. Coral Dragon is also a good option just because it draws a card, so it cycles the card, draws one, then we can discard one to pop a card. If we discard a Metaphys and it gets banished, you know, all things that could be benefit. So definitely a work in progress, but those are a lot of the things I have that are working now. And that's it for talking about extra deck cards. So that is it for my Metaphys deck. So yeah, Metaphys is a pretty intricate deck that's got lots of neat interactions based around banishing, and it's pretty cool. I love all the all these new versions of the classic monsters. I love being benefited by banishing cards and just benefiting off of it while it also hurts so many opposing decks. It just makes it really fun to play, really cool. It's also very showy because it, when you've got lots of Metaphys banished, it does a lot, which is pretty cool. And definitely is a kind of deck playstyle that I'm not used to playing, but with Metaphys, I can dig it. So, thanks for checking out the profile. Appreciate you tuning in. Love to know if you're playing Metaphys or any other Banish-based decks. Now that I have a lot of these good Banish tools, maybe I'll look into doing Grand Maju style deck sometime, because I always kind of really appreciate that Grand Maju de Iza is playable. So, thanks for checking out the profile. I'll catch y'all in the next one.